Timeline of the Warhammer 40,000 Universe Part 2. The Rise of Mankind. The Age of Terror and the Stellar Exodus. For millions of standard years after the Necrons and the Cetan Masters went into hibernation on the two worlds, the devastated sentient populations of the galaxy slowly recovered from their red harvests. In time, the Eldar emerged as the most dominant civilization in the galaxy, with the core of the star-spanning empire located in the region of what would later become the Eye of Terror Warp Rift. But on the planet called Earth and later Terra by its inhabitants, a humanoid species known as mankind was rising to prominence over 40,000 standard years ago. During the Age of Terror, or the Age of Progress as it is sometimes called by imperial historians, the human race advanced beyond its ancient pre-industrial past to obtain spacefaring capability and began to slowly settle the habitable worlds in its own solar system and in the star systems near its homeworld using massive sublight starships. The stellar exodus which occurred during the Age of Terror is a poorly understood period of human history which is generally accepted to cover the majority of mankind's initial forays into interstellar space and the genesis of most of the oldest human colonies. Beginning at some unknown point in the mid to late third millennium. This period is generally understood to lead into the Dark Age of technology sometime around the 15th millennium. During much of the stellar exodus, humanity lacked any knowledge of the existence of the warp or warp drive and so was forced to travel between the stars in great sublight generation ships or using cryogenic hibernation. Dark Age of technology, from 15th millennium to 25th millennium. Much of the era of human history known to imperial historians as the Dark Age of technology that lasted between approximately the 15th millennium and the 25th millennium is mysterious. It was in this time that the psychic mutants called navigators were first born, and combined with the invention of the warp drive, allowed humanity to travel between worlds faster than the speed of light by using the dangerous hyperdimensional, psychically-reactive medium of the Immaterium or warp. The existence of rapid interstellar travel allowed human colony worlds to interact on a normal timescale for the first time, and interstellar commerce and communication became possible, allowing like-minded human worlds to join into political and economic combines for their mutual benefit. Eventually, at some point during this era, all of humanity was united beneath some form of federated interstellar government. What is also known, largely from the works of Keeper Crippius, is that a group known as the Golden Men relied on the works of the Stone Men in order to create a fantastically prosperous interstellar society, but one devoid, by later imperial standards, of spirituality or piety. Focused instead upon the advancement of science and technology. The Stone Men are known to have created a third group, the Iron Men, postulated to be some form of artificially intelligent robots, in order to assist them in their labors and carry out military duties. The Iron Men became uncontrolled and rebelled against their human creators, and a cataclysmic conflict broke out, resulting in a partial Malthusian catastrophe across much of the settled galaxy in which there were no longer enough resources to support the vast populations of human beings. Even worse, following the destruction caused by the war against the Iron Men, human psychers began to appear in large numbers across many human colony worlds, one of the harbingers of the final decline of the Eldar Empire, which controlled even more of the galaxy than mankind did in these years. The result was humanity's first introduction to the demonic horrors of the warp and the ultimate collapse of human interstellar civilization during what became known as the Age of Strife. The result was humanity's first introduction to the demonic horrors of the warp and the ultimate collapse of human interstellar civilization during what became known as the Age of Strife. The Age of Strife, from 25th millennium to 30th millennium. During the so-called Dark Age of technology, humanity had reached its scientific and technological peak. The Standard Template Construct, or STC, a computer database of schematics for all known advanced human technologies, had been perfected by human scientists and engineers and allowed an unprecedented expansion of humanity throughout the galaxy. One of the reasons humanity was so successful at conquering a large part of the galaxy was the development of the artificially intelligent constructs now only known in Imperial legend as the Iron Men. These powerful and fully intelligent combat robots won many wars for humanity, but for some reason turned against their masters at the end of the Dark Age of technology. The war was eventually won by humanity, but at a great cost. The damage was catastrophic and had shattered much of humanity's power. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning of mankind's misfortunes. As humanity became widely dispersed across the galaxy during the Age of Technology, the ancient Eldar Empire began its decline. The great success of the advanced Eldar race had led to decadence and hedonism on a grand scale. Within the immaterial, psychic universe of the Warp, the spiritual corruption of the Eldar civilization was reflected in the forming of a new Chaos God, Slaanesh, which in turn caused massive disturbances in the Warp. Parts of the galaxy became isolated by these warp storms, making warp travel and telepathic interstellar communication increasingly impossible as the years passed, cutting off many human colony worlds from one another, including those of the solar system. Towards the end of the Age of Technology, psychers first appeared among humanity. While persecuted on many backward, regressive human worlds as witches, in enlightened and progressive societies these psychers were at first protected and accepted. The initial intolerance for psychers would later seem prescient, as many human worlds fell to the dominance of demons and other warp creatures using possessed psychers as gateways into the physical world. Only worlds which had rigorously suppressed psychers survived the Age of Strife. The Age of Strife followed the Age of Technology, as human civilization collapsed in widespread insanity, demonic possession, anarchy, and interhuman civil war. Terrible weapons of the Golden Age of Technology were unleashed, devastating many human colonies and turning once verdant worlds such as Baal Secundus into irradiated desert planets. Many isolated and vulnerable human-colonized worlds also became prey to hostile alien races, such as the Orcs. In a relatively short span of time, the once galaxy-spanning human civilization was brought to its knees and was forced to endure nearly 5 millennia of anarchy, terror, war, genocide, and slavery. Other than tales of great suffering, little information concerning these long years survived this dark time to be known to the men and women of the Immaterium. The fall of the Eldar from 25th millennium to 30th millennium. Before the fall of their potent interstellar empire, the Eldar were a technologically and psychically advanced humanoid species, generally considered the most powerful intelligent race in the entire galaxy. The technology had advanced so far that little or no labor was required by individual Eldar to provide the daily necessities of life. As a result of the sheer boredom and ennui that resulted, they were extremely bored. End of include. At some point during the 25th millennium, groups of Eldar began forming what was known as pleasure cults dedicated to the pursuit of every pleasure and sensation that life had to offer the kind. Despite the prediction of the reclusive Eldar seers that warned of impending doom if the Eldar did not change their hedonistic ways, government within the Eldar Empire soon collapsed and the moral degeneration of their homeworlds and various colony worlds continued unimpeded. As the pursuit of ever more extreme experiences reached its height, death reigned in the streets of Eldar cities, hunter and hunted, each being part of a twisted ritual of destruction that consumed millions in orgies of savage bloodlust and excess. Some Eldar were able to see that the now corrupt society was destroying itself, and fled in disgust. These refugees would settle in the distant, rural colonies of their empire, and would later be known as the Exiled or take to the massive. world-sized Eldar Craftworlds and sail amidst the stars as merchants and explorers, far from the scenes of hedonistic excess that were destroying the heart of the Eldar Empire. Upon dying, the soul of all deceased, sentient beings traverse the bounds of the physical realm and go to rest within the hyperdimensional realm of psychically reactive energy that undergirds all of the reality known as the Immaterium or Warp. As more and more corrupt Eldar died, the souls began to coalesce into a larger entity within the Warp, a living representation of the hedonistic corruption that had taken their lives. This growing presence in the warp caused massive warp storms to aggregate across the galaxy, eventually making interstellar travel and communications impossible for the colonies of humanity, bringing on mankind's age of strife. This collection of corrupt Eldar souls gained sentience sometime in the late 30th millennium, creating the powerful new warp entity known as the Chaos God Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, called She Who Thirsts by the Eldar. When Slaanesh came to be, an ethereal explosion occurred that spanned the extent of Warpspace within the Milky Way Galaxy, with the epicenter being located within the Eldar homeworlds. All Eldar caught in the immense psychic blast were instantly killed, the souls consumed by Slaanesh. Most of the remaining Eldar gods who existed within the warp were destroyed by Slaanesh. Kaela Mensha Khaine, the Eldar God of War, attempted to combat the new Chaos God, but Khaine's form was shattered and exiled to the mortal realm where it came to rest in the infinity circuits of the Eldar Craftworlds but could be embodied in the form of animated constructs called avatars, which rested in the hearts of the various Craftworlds during times of grave peril. The only other Eldar gods to survive the fall was the trickster god Sigarash, also called the Laughing God, who hides himself within the Eldar Webway, and Aisha, who was ripped from the jaws of Slaanesh by the Chaos God Nurgle, who now keeps her as a slave. The fall utterly destroyed the once vast interstellar Eldar Empire, leaving scattered bands of Eldar fighting for survival. Before the fall, vast spacecraft called Craftworlds were constructed, enabling those wishing to escape the degeneration of the Eldar homeworlds to flee, along with samples of their lost world's flora and fauna. When the fall occurred, the various Craftworlds rode out the ethereal shockwave in the warp, some being destroyed in the process. The exiled worlds, far from the epicenter of the terrible catastrophe, were largely untouched by the birth scream of Slaanesh. In order to prevent the events of the fall from ever recurring, the Eldar devised the Eldar Path system, by which every Eldar would follow a strict, almost fanatical life path pursuing a specific activity, such as crafting or war, for a portion of their long lifespans, before switching to another path when the previous one grew stale. In this way, the Eldar hoped to control the extreme emotional and psychic sensitivity that had left him open to corruption by chaos in the first place. However, some corrupted Eldar did survive the birth of Slaanesh by taking refuge within the Webway itself, which had long been home to a nearly infinite cavalcade of hyperdimensional sub-realms that were protected from Slaanesh's predations by the psychic wards erected within the labyrinthine dimension to keep the dangers of the warp at bay. These sadistic beings became known as the Dark Eldar, the inhabitants of the dark city within the Webway called Kamara, and they later preyed on humans and Eldar alike to find souls they could devour to keep their own lives from being consumed by Slaanesh. The Great Crusade, approximately from 798th year of the 30th millennium to the 4th year of the 31st millennium. The Great Crusade of the Emperor of Mankind began as the Age of Strife came to an end for humanity. The warp storms isolating the human colony worlds for 5,000 Terran years had finally disappeared with the birth of Slaanesh and the fall of the Eldar in the 30th millennium, and the Emperor of Mankind, who had united Terra under his rule during the Unification Wars at the end of the Age of Strife, was ready with his genetically enhanced space marines and the Imperial Army to reunite all of humanity under his enlightened rule and the rationalist philosophy of imperial truth. making a pact known as the Treaty of Mars with the cult Mechanicus of the machine god on Mars. In the late 30th millennium, the Emperor promised to spare their lives. The Emperor despised the use of bionics and rigid adherence to organized religion as being against everything that he stood for, so long as they aided him in his mission to reunite humanity across the galaxy. The Emperor was a man of enormous skill in the practice of science and the development of new technology, and so in him, many members of the cult of the machine saw the coming of the Omnissiah that had been prophesied by the faith. In the treaty they signed with the Emperor, the Mechanicum of Mars pledged the support to the creation of a new Imperium of Man in which they would serve as the Adeptus Mechanicus. And the symbol of the Imperium changed from the lightning bolt used by the Emperor during the unification wars on Terra to the double-headed eagle known as the Aquila, to symbolize the union of the empires of Earth and Mars. With the forge factories and industrial output of Mars, the Emperor was able to refit his armies, and more importantly, he now had the use of the Adeptus Mechanicus's Titan legions, giant robotic war machines with the potential to dominate the battlefield. At first, the Imperium's expansion into interstellar space was slow, since the Imperial army was still small, and more importantly, the Emperor's 20 Space Marine legions were inhibited by the absence of their primarchs, which made the enhancement time for the creation of a new Space Marine much longer. However, this was to end, as, on Cethonia, a planet in a star system not far from Terra, the Emperor for the first time was reunited with one of his missing primarchs, Horus. Having been discovered at an early age, the Emperor took Horus under his wing and taught him all he knew. Horus and the Emperor had a truly unique bond, that of father and son, and many times they saved each other's lives. But after 30 years, the Emperor discovered another of the Space Marine primarchs, Robert Guilliman. Although Horus was pleased with the discovery of one of his brothers, he secretly hoped to always be the Emperor's favorite son. In time, all the primarchs were found on the worlds they had been sent to by the machinations of the ruinous powers of chaos, and each was placed in command of their respective Space Marine legions. The legions, as a result, were massively expanded with new recruits from their primarch's adopted homeworlds, and new Space Marines could now be produced within only a single Terran year. But this acceleration produced fundamental defects within the psyche of each Space Marine, which was later to prove fatal to many. The Great Crusade lasted for 200 standard years, into the early years of the 31st millennium, and brought many long-lost star systems into the fold of the newborn Imperium of Man. Under the command of the War Council of the Emperor and his rediscovered primarchs, vast expeditionary fleets comprised of the Imperial Army and the 20 Space Marine legions fought back aliens, feral human tribes, petty human dictators, and the warp-tainted forces that had gained control of large portions of human-settled space during the Age of Strife. Once a human-settled world had been pacified, it was brought into imperial compliance by a new imperial planetary governor chosen by the Emperor. Part of this process included the rooting out of any superstitious or religious beliefs of the population with respect solely for a reason and the measured advancement of science and technology, an atheistic belief system known as the imperial truth. It was often occupied by a unit or units of the Imperial Army that were left behind to complete the integration of the planet into the Imperium, while the expeditionary fleet, led by Astartes, moved on to its next target. As the primarchs took control of the Space Marine legions that had been crafted from the gene seed, the Great Crusade separated, moving in many directions and reaching far across the galaxy. After the Imperial Crusade on the world of Alinor concluded, upon bringing that planet into imperial compliance, the Emperor claimed it as the greatest victory of the Imperium to date, and that Horus should be given all credit. Hailing Horus and his Lunar Wolves Legion, later renamed the Sons of Horus, the Emperor stated that he would have to leave the expeditionary fleets behind and return to Terra to begin the next, secret phase of his plan to ensure humanity's domination of the galaxy. and that in his place Horus would be declared War Master, the de facto commander of all the Emperor's armies on the Great Crusade. Although Horus was troubled that the Emperor should leave him and his brother Primarchs to carry on alone for some unknown reason, with Horus as their new commander, the Imperium's armies and space marines continued to expand ever outwards, rediscovering lost human worlds and bringing them into the enlightened Imperium's fold. This situation lasted until the outbreak of the terrible Horus heresy. The Horus heresy, approximately 5th to the 14th year of the 31st millennium. Eventually, the Imperial War Master Horus fell to the temptations of the ruinous powers of chaos and attempted to destroy the Imperium from within by usurping the power of the Emperor. The treason of Horus, known in later centuries as the Horus heresy, spread to embrace approximately half of the Imperium's military forces, including small planetary defense forces, many regiments of the Imperial Army, the 9 Chaos Space Marine traitor legions and several of the Adeptus Mechanicus's potent titans, forming the core of Dark Mechanicum adepts who chose to serve the ruinous powers and were later called the Dark Mechanicus. The terrible civil war lasted for 7 standard years and culminated in a massive siege of the Imperial Palace during the climactic Battle of Terra. After 55 days of fighting, the war was ended by the Emperor of Mankind and Horus dueling in single combat aboard Horus' flagship, the battle barge Vengeful Spirit, in orbit of Terra, before further loyalist reinforcements could reach the world and throw the traitor forces back from their prize. Although mortally wounded during the final battle with his favored son, who had become swollen and immensely powerful with the favor of the Chaos Gods, the Emperor was able to strike down Horus using the full gathered might of his awesome psychic powers and obliterate Horus' soul from the warp, preventing him from being resurrected to serve the ruinous powers once more. Without their leader, the unity of the forces of chaos soon crumbled and his loyalist reinforcements led by Robert Guilliman of the Ultramarines arrived in the solar system. The Chaos Space Marine legions and their allies retreated to the massive warp rift in the segmentum obscurus known as the Eye of Terror. At his own direction, the crippled body of the Emperor was installed into the cybernetic life support mechanisms of the psychic amplifier known as the Golden Throne, so that his mind would continue to have an anchor in real space from which his potent mind in the warp could battle the influence of the Chaos Gods and continue to direct the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that was the lifeblood of the Imperium's communications, commerce, and interstellar travel. Effects of a small battle of the heresy on the planet of Sotha drew the attention of the higher fleets of the Tyranids to the galaxy. It was during these days that they started moving towards this new prey. The Great Scouring, approximately 14th to 21st year of the 31st millennium. The Great Scouring, or simply the Scouring, was the Imperium of Man's great counter-offensive against the traitor legions. It began immediately after the end of the Horus heresy following the death of the War Master Horus and the failure of his siege of the Imperial Palace during the Battle of Terra in the early 31st millennium. It succeeded in driving the forces of chaos from Imperial space into finding refuge in the permanent warp storm known as the Eye of Terror. Before actually being confined for all time within the life support mechanisms of the Golden Throne, the Emperor had pronounced judgment on the traitors. He declared them excommunicate traitorous, and determined that they were to be driven into the hellish region of the warp rift called the Eye of Terror, which would hold them for all eternity. All records and memory of the traitor legions were to be expunged from the Imperial archives. Worlds such as Istvan V and Davin would be scoured clean of all life because of the corruption by chaos. The traitor legions associated troops from the Dark Mechanicus, the Titan legions or the regiments and starships of the Imperial Army and Imperial Navy that had turned to chaos were to be destroyed or driven into the Eye. It would be as if the traitor legions had never existed to sully the Imperium with the betrayal After the death of Horus, those traitors who had not been slain outright during the siege of the imperial palace fled before the vengeful wrath of the loyalist forces. Many made good their escape into unexplored space or disappeared into the Eye of Terror or other, lesser-known warp rifts such as the Maelstrom. Fighting continued for another 7 standard years after the heresy had ended with Horus' death on the bridge of his great flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, before the traitor forces were wholly destroyed or exiled into the Eye of Terror. Many chaos-corrupted star systems were cleansed and placed under the watch of the newborn Inquisition. The Emperor's dream of a new age of enlightenment, a time when mankind was freed from superstition and ignorance, would turn into something far different. The Great Scouring would be followed by the 10 millennia-long era known as the Age of the Imperium. The second founding, approximately 21st year of the 31st millennium. In the midst of the Great Scouring campaign, the second founding occurred. The remaining 9 loyalist Space Marine legions were disbanded to form the far smaller 1,000-man organizations known as chapters, in accordance with the established dictates of Primarch Robert Guilliman's Codex Astartes. A portion of the Space Marines, now collectively known as the Adeptus Astartes, maintained the parent legion's original names, badges, and colors, whilst the remaining chapters took on new names and heraldry. The majority of these second founding chapters still serve the Imperium today. The Age of the Imperium, from 31st millennium till present. The Age of the Imperium is the time period that began with the end of the Horus heresy in the early 31st millennium and is typically referred to in the present tense. The approximate time period begins in the 31st millennium and continues forward, with the last year represented in imperial records being 999.M41. The Age of the Imperium is generally conveyed as spanning from the end of the Horus heresy to the narrative present, a space of approximately 10,000 Terran years. Time of rebirth, approximately from 31st millennium to approximately 32nd millennium. During the time of rebirth, the Imperium of Man slowly recovered from the Horus heresy. The myriad wars of the Great Scouring were fought in the years immediately after the end of the Horus heresy and the death of the traitorous War Master. In a lengthy campaign, the Imperium's forces hunted and banished the remaining traitor legions from the occupation of human space. Eventually, the Chaos Space Marines and the Ruinous Powers' other followers among the forces of Chaos found refuge in the massive warp rift known as the Eye of Terror. For a time the Imperium knew peace from the corrupted followers of the Chaos Gods. At the same time, many alien races that had been fought during the Great Crusade reappeared in human space to take advantage of the disruptions caused by the Horus heresy and plagued the vulnerable worlds of man. In order to prevent a single person from controlling as much military power as Horus had mastered and eliminate the risk of another large-scale civil war, numerous reforms were enacted at the hands of Robert Guilliman to reshape the Imperium's political and military structure. In this way, the men and women of the Imperium could face the new post-heresy realities of an interstellar government where the Emperor was no longer capable of carrying on the day-to-day tasks of interstellar governance. The Imperial Army was divided into the land-based forces of the Imperial Guard and the space-based forces of the Imperial Navy, each with a separate chain of command structure and bureaucracy. The remaining 9 loyalist Space Marine legions adopted the Codex Astartes written by the Ultramarines Primarch Robert Guilliman and were split into the many smaller Space Marine chapters of the second founding that were comprised of only 1,000 men each, along with their own supporting spacecraft and planetary fiefdoms. The Orcs rampaged across the Imperium on a massive scale in 544.M32. The number of greenskin attacks grew until it became the greatest Orc invasion that the galaxy had ever known, eclipsing even the Orc Warg defeated by the Emperor and Horus during the Illinois Crusade, which had earned Horus the title of War Master. Nothing was safe from the Orcs' primal desire to conquer the galaxy, and their widespread advances were only halted when the Imperium resorted to the use of the most extreme measures, at great cost to the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. The Byzantine politics of the Imperium took a calamitous turn in 546. Capital M32 in an event remembered as the beheading when the High Lords of Terra, the successors of the Council of Terra that had been established to administer the day-to-day affairs of the Imperium and now ruled in the Emperor's name, were slain to a man on the orders of Draken Vangorich, the Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum. A Space Marine retribution force drawn from the Halo Brethren, Imperial Fists and Sable Swords chapters tracked the Grand Master to an Assassinorum temple. The commander of the Astartes strike force was assassinated as soon as he made planetfall, but the remaining Battle Brothers carried out the attack without him. Inside the temple, they were attacked by 100 Evazar assassins. Only a single Space Marine survived to reach Grand Master Vangorich and end his life with a bolter. The Imperium descended into anarchy for several years as new High Lords rose to power. The Forging, approximately 32nd millennium to approximately 35th millennium. The Forging is also sometimes known to Imperial historians as the Golden Age of the Imperium. During this period, the Adeptus Terra brought the most important human-settled star systems of the galaxy that had not been reached by the Great Crusade under Imperial control and expanded the interstellar borders of the Imperium. Internal stability was gained with the establishment of astropath choirs on countless worlds, with major hubs established on the best garrisoned Imperial worlds, including Armageddon, Bacca and Macragge. This allowed a reliable network of interstellar superluminal communication to function using the power of an astropath's telepathy to send and receive messages across light years. This period also saw the slowing of the decline in the Imperium's technology and the growth of the interstellar economy due to the rediscovery of a valuable Standard Template Construct (STC) database from the Dark Age of technology in the Canu system as the Imperium expanded. Once more the Imperium repelled the forces of Chaos renegades, heretics and aliens alike across the galaxy and reclaimed countless lost and rebellious regions for the human race. The Emperor, always an object of veneration, only increased his devoted following of worshippers after being joined to the Golden Throne. Many imperial cults dedicated to the worship of the Emperor as the god of mankind arise over the following centuries, the majority of which were united into a centralized religious body known as the Ecclesiarchy. This powerful church gains momentum until, in the 32nd millennium, it is finally granted the status of the official state religion of the Imperium and the title of Adeptus Ministorum. It is only a few centuries later that Ecclesiash Venus II receives a seat amongst the High Lords of Terra, and after 300 standard years, the seat reserved for the Ecclesiash is made permanent within the ranks of the Senatorum Imperialis. In the 646th year of the 32nd millennium, Agnithio, the chapter master of the Ultramarines, unites over 50 leaders from other chapters of Space Marines and arrives upon Terra. Such a show of power and faith puts an end to the squabbling for the contentious seats of the High Lords of Terra that has consumed the differing factions since the beheading. In locked council with the mightiest of mankind's warriors, such matters were quickly sorted out. None know exactly what was done or said, but when the Space Marines departed back to the far-scattered missions, there once again sat 12 High Lords of Terra. If there was further dissension, none dared speak it aloud. In the 888th year of the 32nd millennium, the Imperium was consumed by the event known as the Astropath Wars. There is no further information on this conflict available in Imperial records. In the 910th year of the 32nd millennium, the event known as the Firestorm unfolded. There is no further information on this conflict available in Imperial records. Sometime during the 33rd millennium, the War of the Confessor unfolds when, in a particularly violent display, the Adeptus Ministorum exerts its newfound political strength. Many key shrine worlds are added to its holdings during this first of many wars of faith to come. In the 265th year of the 33rd millennium, Admiral Usurrs of the Imperial Navy was cast down by the High Lords of Terra for becoming too ambitious. However, he is still too powerful within the Navy to be executed without initiating a costly civil war, so he is instead dispatched on an explorator mission to the intergalactic gulf beyond the Milky Way. For the following decade, Usurrs' reports reach Terra by astropath, detailing the conquest of new star systems for the Emperor. After 2 decades, these reports finally cease. Contact is never re-established with the star systems Usurrs mentioned in his reports. In the 313th year of the 33rd millennium, the Siege of Eternity's Gate unfolds. In the 615th year of the 33rd millennium, the Blade of Infinity, a pre-heresy cruiser, emerged from the warp, its re-entry signature suggesting that it had left real space over 20,000 standard years before. This period predated even the warp drive's invention in the age of technology and suggested a radical time stream disorder. The Vox transmissions picked up from the vessel suggested that the Blade of Infinity was trying to communicate some type of warning, but before much could be deciphered, the ancient starship disappeared once again into the warp. In its wake arrived an invasion fleet of Chaos Space Marine legions, the archenemy of the Immaterium, who wreaked much havoc. The Blade of Infinity re-emerged from the warp several more times in subsequent years, always as a harbinger of further incursions into imperial space by the forces of chaos from the Immaterium. In the 831st year of the 33rd millennium, during what became known as the Year of the Ghosts, the Honored Dead rose up in the Segmentum Solar to drive back the terrors of the warp. Sometime during the early years of 34th millennium, a great threat to the Imperium arises beyond the ghost stars. Even today, its true nature remains suppressed. The ravages are said to cause the extermination of a score of Space Marine chapters and souls unnumbered. Much of the extant evidence relating to this threat has been censored or purposely destroyed by the Inquisition. But there are contradictory indications which describe the nature of the threat as both a star-spawned plague that swept away scores of worlds and 2 nightmare engines that slaughtered the populations of whole sectors. This threat is remembered only as the Pale Wasting. In the 401st year of the 34th millennium, the terrible crisis known as the Howling unfolded. Black Templar Space Marines ended the Catalexis heresy by executing the Cacodominus, an alien cybernetic psyker whose formidable powers allowed it to psychically control the populace of 1,300 star systems. Unfortunately, the Cacodominus's death scream was amplified by the warp and burned out the minds of 1 billion human astropaths, while it also distorted the beacon of the Astronomicon. Millions of starships were lost in the resulting upheaval, and entire subsectors of the Imperium slid once more into barbarism without the dictates of the Adeptus Terra to guide them. Millions of starships were lost in the resulting upheaval, and entire subsectors of the Imperium slid once more into barbarism without the dictates of the Adeptus Terra to guide them. It is a terrible price to pay for victory. Following a fierce warp storm bursting from the Eye of Terror in the 666th year of the 34th millennium, the first of many warp stars are sighted. The tendrils of their power pulled any starships or small planets that fell within their reach to a grisly, if spectacular, doom. In the 934th year of the 34th millennium, came the warnings of the Craftworld Ulthway to the Imperium. The Nova Terra Interregnum, approximately mid-34th millennium to late 35th millennium. The Nova Terra interregnum is also known as the time of the Twin Empires and was a troubled period in imperial history when the Imperium of Man fractured for a time into warring factions for over 900 standard years during the mid-34th through the late 35th millennium. During this period the rebellious Your Council of Nova Terra dismissed the authority of the High Lords of Terra and claimed separate rule over the Imperium Segmentum Pacificus. During the dark days of the Nova Terra interregnum, this period in human history of division and civil war fractured the Imperium into a number of different warring factions. The Adeptus Mechanicus was also affected during this interregnum by division and internal warfare brought about by doctrinal differences and competing centers of power. The Adeptus Mechanicus was also affected during this interregnum by division and internal warfare brought about by doctrinal differences and competing centers of power. One of the most discordant of these conflicts was the Moirai Schism, which occurred sometime in 35th millennium. A dogmatic battle between the Martian orthodoxy of the standard cult Mechanicus and a far more radical creed based upon the prophetic writings of a triad of tech mystics from the Minor Forge world of Moirai. The Moirai Schism was one of the most divisive and widespread doctrinal conflicts to afflict the Adeptus Mechanicus since the Horus Heresy. Moirai was eventually blasted into dust, but not before heretical writings from that world spread like wildfire through the domains of the Mechanicus even after Moirai was reduced to a cinder by the Fabricator General of Mars' rectification fleet. But not before the schism spread throughout the cult of Mars, the Titan legions and several Space Marine chapters with close ties to the Adeptus Mechanicus such as the Iron Hands. Over 2,000 Terran years of bloody strife pass before the baleful doctrine is considered purged. After almost a millennium of low-grade civil war and political maneuvering, the Cataclysm of Souls in the 975th year of the 35th millennium reunited the Imperium. In that year, the ecclesiarchy tried to transform the Imperium into a theocracy where political differences would be submerged by usurping the power of the rest of the High Lords of Terra. Their efforts ended only in stirring up massive religious civil wars against the Your Council of Nova Terra, who was denounced as heretics who stood in defiance of the will of the God Emperor when they rejected the ecclesiarchy's attempts to increase its power over the state. This religious rebellion on many worlds of the Segmentum Pacificus ultimately overthrew the Your Council and restored the rule of the High Lords over the entirety of the Imperium's territory. Though billions died in these religious wars and the power of the ecclesiarchy had been increased throughout the Imperium to a dangerous level as a result. In 980 year of the 35th millennium, the galaxy suffered from the onslaught of the massive HRUD rising. In the 991st year of the 35th millennium, the 21st founding, later known as the Cursed Founding, occurs. The Cursed 21st Founding was the largest founding of Space Marine chapters since the second founding following the Horus Heresy. It had taken place in the 35th millennium shortly before the start of the Age of Apostasy. Upon the world of Inculaba, a secret Geno-lab was the site of the secret project known as Homo sapiens Novus, where Mechanicus genetors attempted to perfect and remove the existing, identified deficiencies in flawed Astartes gene seed, and ultimately begin the production of new and improved Primarch-like Space Marines. But the project was doomed to failure as the genetors proved far less skilled in the genetic sciences than the Emperor of Mankind, and their efforts resulted in the development of seriously flawed gene seed that was used to craft the organ implants for the new chapters. Worse still, some of these chapters have developed unexpected genetic idiosyncrasies, mutations that strain the tolerance of the Inquisition and threaten the chapter's survival. The most seriously afflicted chapters suffer the wrath of the Grey Knights after they are called in by the Inquisition to expunge the threat. Some escape this fate and flee, eventually turning traitor and swearing themselves to chaos. In the 104th year of the 35th millennium, the War of Recovery unfolded when patchy reports of technological wonders on the planets of the Mortium chain reached Mars. Hoping that it might be possible to recover new SDC databases, the Adeptus Mechanicus launched an expedition which began an escalating war that lasted for over a standard century. Aided by the advanced weaponry they recovered, the forces of the Mechanicus freed the human colonies of the region from Xeno's occupation, and several first-generation copies of STC databases concerning certain technologies were returned in triumph to Mars. Age of Apostasy, the 36th millennium. Foreshadowed by the deep political divisions of the Nova Terra Interregnum, a new age of dissent and power struggles consumed the Imperium in the 36th millennium. Zeal eclipsed reason, and misrule reigned supreme. The word of the Emperor was subverted wholesale by corrupt ideologues, each struggling to usurp total control of the Emperor's realm for themselves. This era is known as the Age of Apostasy, a time of brutal imperial civil war, and is considered to be one of the bloodiest times within the Imperium's history after the Horus heresy. Around the 200th year of the 36th millennium, the Age of Apostasy is marked by the Reign of Blood, when the High Lord Gog Vandire, an insane tyrant, became both the Ecclesiarch of the Adeptus Ministorum and the High Lord of the Adeptus Administratum through bribery, blackmail, corruption, and murder. During Vandire's Reign of Blood, multiple wars of faith were fought as Vandire attempted to gain control of the Imperium. The Reign of Blood lasted for 70 Terran years before a messenger delivered the news that heralded its end. On the world of Dimimar, a man named Sebastian Thor and his sect of the Imperial Cult, the Confederation of Light, denounced High Lord Vandire as a traitor to the Emperor. As an accomplished orator, Thor was able to sway billions to his cause. Eventually, Vandire was besieged on Terra by several Space Marine chapters and several Imperial Guard regiments. The Space Marines fleet unleashed a massive orbital bombardment which caught most of the traitors in the open. Lord Vandire was killed by his bodyguards, the brides of the Emperor, who were convinced that they had been tricked into betraying the Emperor by Vandire. In the aftermath, the ecclesiarchy was reformed, and the brides of the Emperor were transformed into the Adeptus Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, the armed forces of the ecclesiarchy and the chamber militant of the Inquisition's new-formed Ordo Hereticus. The Ordo Hereticus was intended to root out the internal enemies of the Imperium, watch over the ecclesiarchy, and prevent the emergence of another Gog Vandire who sought to serve his own selfish ends rather than the will of the Emperor. In the 310th year of the 36th millennium, the event known as the Plague of Unbelief is also considered part of the Age of Apostasy of the 36th millennium, although it occurred several decades after High Lord Gog Vandire's death and Sebastian Thor's ascension to the position of Ecclesiarch. Many false prophets appeared throughout the anarchic Age of Apostasy, some little more than madmen leading rebel armies, others spiritual demagogues who commanded entire worlds and sector-spanning armies. The most powerful of these was the apostate Cardinal of Gathalamor, Bucharest, whose heresies reached such proportions they became known as the Plague of Unbelief, not to be confused with the Curse of Unbelief. A potent arcane disease spread by servants of the Chaos God Nurgle in the 41st millennium and better known as the Zombie Plague. The Plague of Unbelief came to an end after the heroic sacrifices of the imperial saint known as the Great Confessor, Dolan Chirosius, who willingly martyred himself on Gathalamor. Chirosius's example proved so potent a display of faith in the God Emperor that the entire population of the world rose up and cast down Bucharest, restoring imperial rule and the orthodox faith of the God Emperor. In the 754th year of the 36th millennium, the Imperium was struck by the web of intrigue disaster. There is no further information in imperial records concerning this event. In the 989th year of the 36th millennium, as the Eye of Terror and other warp rifts visibly expand, the tech priests servicing the Golden Throne demand an increase in the number of psychers needed to fuel the Emperor's growing appetite and maintain the Astronomicon. The black ships increase in number and the frequency of their voyages to collect the tithes of psychers from across the Imperium. According to some records, 4 times the number of psychers are sacrificed daily to maintain optimal levels of power to the Golden Throne. Age of Redemption, approximately 37th millennium. The Age of Redemption marked the era when the Imperium recovered from the sins of apostasy in a reign of blood and tears. The imperial cult grew in zeal as never before. Heretic pyres burn night and day on 1,000 imperial worlds as the people of the Imperium sought to mortify the sins against the God Emperor through the scourging of the flesh of others. Crusade after crusade was launched by the Space Marines and other imperial military forces to recapture the lost wealth of the Imperium and push back the hordes of chaos, orcs and other alien threats to humanity. This religious fervor eventually peaked in an orgy of fanatical devotion to crusading in the Emperor's name, and thousands of worlds were left with inadequate defenses as sector fleets of the Imperial Navy. Space Marine chapters and Imperial Guard regiments are drawn into a longer and more terrible redemption crusade spurred on by this religious fanaticism. In the 10th year of the 37th millennium, the wrath of the Chaos Sun fell upon the Imperium when the red giant star at the heart of the Maxil Beta system explodes in an expanding cloud of warp flame. The inhabitants of every world for hundreds of light years are either mutated beyond recognition or possessed by the denizens of the warp. In response, the High Lords of Terror ordered the mobilization of whatever Imperial forces were close at hand. So it is that the Grey Knights are joined by a dozen other chapters, countless Imperial Guard regiments and the Rising Orders militant of the Adeptus Sororitas. The resulting battle does much to heal the remaining wounds in the Imperial body politic that had been opened by Gog Vandier's treachery. In the 20th year of the 37th millennium, the High Lords of Terror, in their mercy, begin a systematic and deadly purge within the ranks of the Adeptus Terra and on many worlds across the galaxy to ensure that such a corruption of faith as occurred during the Reign of Blood can never happen again. This becomes known as the Great Cull. Among the most devastating of the conflicts unleashed during the Age of Redemption were the Abyssal Crusade and the Ecclusiad War. The Abyssal Crusade of the 321st year of the 37th millennium began when Saint Basilius found 30 Space Marine chapters wanting in their devotion to the Emperor. The guilty embarked upon a crusade into the Eye of Terror to earn the salvation and purge those human-settled worlds stolen from mankind by the birth of the Dark Prince of Pleasure, Slaanesh. The Ecclusiad of the 555th of the 37th millennium started when the northwestern fringe of the galaxy was ravaged by the heretics known as the Apostles of the Blind King, rogue tech priests who viewed humanity as an utter affront to the machine god. The Apostles had uncovered wondrous artifacts from the dark age of technology that made possible the transformation of ordinary stars into supernovae. The constellations of the galaxy were changed forever when the Apostles purged the outer segmentum obscurus of human life using these weapons. War raged for a decade until the navigator Joyre Macran discovered the palace warship of the Blind King hidden in a fold of the warp. Escaping with this crucial intelligence, Macran guided the Imperial Navy's Emperor-class battleship Dominus Astra to the palace's location. The Blind King was killed and the genocide ended when the Dominus Astra's lance batteries pierced the palace warship's hull, and without his psychically prescient leadership the Apostles were swiftly overcome and their weapons were hidden away in the vaults of Mars. By the 754th year of the 37th millennium, on thousands of planets, menials rebel against the dreary drudgery with wild-eyed leaders espousing a better way of life, a galaxy of tolerance. The movement is especially popular amongst the youth of the Imperium, earning it the title of Children's Crusade. Billions of earnest pilgrims are lured to seek transport to Terra. Some are waylaid by pirates, but the majority disappear into the warp. They became known collectively as the Lost Crusade. In the 956th year of the 37th millennium, the Heavenfall massacres unfolded. Little else is known about them in the imperial records. Emergence of the Tau Empire, from 37th millennium to 41st millennium. In the late 37th millennium, the humanoid Tau race, located on the arid world of Tau in the Ultima Segmentum, was united under the collectivist ideology of the greater good and underwent rapid technological development and a large expansion outwards into interstellar space, where they established a new interstellar empire and settled many worlds in the eastern fringes of the Milky Way Galaxy. The Imperium of Man only came into contact with the Tau Empire in the 963rd year of the 41st millennium, when the Ultramarines clashed with a Tau expeditionary fleet for control of the cursed planet of Malbedhe. As a result of this late first contact, the number of conflicts between the Imperium and the Tau have been minimal compared to the wars fought between mankind and the other, more numerous and widespread interstellar alien species like the Orcs and the Eldar. The expansion of the Tau Empire also caused several other intelligent alien species to be incorporated into its ranks, such as the Kroot and the Vespid. The waning, approximately from 38th millennium to approximately the 750th year of the 41st millennium, with the Imperium's military forces in every branch utterly exhausted by the Redemption Crusades, star system after star system fell to orc invasion, chaos insurgence or sheer rebellion. Anarchy throughout many sectors of the Imperium was rife during a dark period in Imperial history that is now called the Waning. Ever more star systems are turned over by the Administratum to direct rule by Space Marine chapters to preserve stability, as only the Astartes possessed the inviolable military strength required to restore Imperial control in the more lawless regions of the galaxy. Having purged more than 400 worlds within the Eye of Terror, the survivors of the Abyssal Crusade returned to Imperial space in the 112th year of the 38th millennium. Without pausing to claim the honors due for such a successful and protracted crusade, Chapter Master Convac Lan of the Vorpal Swords declares the now ancient Saint Basilius a false idol, and adoration of him tantamount to betrayal. In less than a standard year, every known tomb and shrine dedicated to the false saint is destroyed. After his execution, his bones, along with countless relics, books of doctrine and thousands of living worshippers, are placed on a derelict bulk freighter and launched directly into a nearby star. During the Grim Harvest in the 666th year of the 38th millennium, a great armada of misshapen space hulks drifts out of the warp near Terra. During the Grim Harvest in the 666th year of the 38th millennium, a great armada of misshapen space hulks drifts out of the warp near Terra. Some of the twisted and fused starships can still be identified as transports carrying pilgrims from the Lost Crusade. The Inquisition works feverishly to cover up the fleet's existence and its cargo of mutant and demon-possessed abominations. In the first year of the 39th millennium, the conflict of Helica unfolded. In the 103rd year of the 39th millennium, the Morselian cataclysm struck the Imperium. In the 131st year of the 39th millennium, the Redemption Crusades begin. In each of the segmentums of the Imperium, a great hero emerges. Like unto the Primarchs of old are these warriors, and the combined efforts of the Crusades push back the borders of the Imperium further than they have been for nearly 500 standard years. And then, 50 Terran years later, the five heroes vanish without a trace, spurring Ecclesiastianovian III to declare them Imperial Saints returned to the Emperor's side. A Black Crusade is a term used to describe a number of mass incursions by Chaos Space Marines and the other forces of Chaos into Imperial space from the Eye of Terror. The most prominent of these are the Black Crusades led by the Black Legion's War Master and Horus' successor as the greatest champion of chaos, Undivided Abaddon the Despoiler. The most prominent of these are the Black Crusades led by the Black Legion's War Master and Horus' successor as the greatest champion of chaos, Undivided Abaddon the Despoiler. In the 139th year of the 41st millennium, the 12th Black Crusade, or Gothic War, was a vast campaign launched by Abaddon that engulfed the Gothic sector of the Segmentum Obscurus. After that sector was cut off from Imperial reinforcements and communications by a series of massive warp storms produced by the will of the ruinous powers. It consisted of hundreds of planetary invasions and naval battles spanning the time period the 139th year of the 41st millennium to 160th year of the 41th millennium, and only ended when Abaddon and his Chaos Space Marines, renegade chapters, demonic hosts and rebellious chaos cults were forced to retreat into the Immaterium with the arrival of Imperial reinforcements, as the warp storms that had provided cover for their invasion finally dissipated just as mysteriously as they had begun. On the Imperial side, dozens of Space Marine chapters, nearly 100 Imperial Guard regiments and the better part of 3 Titan legions take part, along with every naval vessel the battle fleet Obscurus can muster. The conflict saw the destruction of several planets and 4 of the 6 irreplaceable ancient alien artifacts known as the Blackstone Fortresses, as well as the deaths of millions, if not billions, of Imperial citizens. Most significantly, the events of the Gothic War revealed the true nature and purpose of the ancient spaceborne alien artifacts known to the Imperium as the Blackstone Fortresses, which had been created by the Old Ones to be used against the Necrons and were capable of destabilizing stars and destroying entire solar systems. Most importantly, Abaddon and the forces of chaos were able to escape back into the Eye of Terror with one of the Blackstone Fortresses, which was then possessed by a splinter of the mind of the Chaos God Slaanesh. This period saw the Macarian conquests, also called the Macarian Crusade, of the 392nd to the 399th year of the 41st millennium, during which Lord Commander Solar Macharius, the Lord of the Segmentum Solar, mustered the greatest human army the galaxy had seen since the Great Crusade. In only 7 standard years, Macharius reconquered 1,000 worlds on the western reaches of the Imperium, and his glory carried him into the darkest sectors, places where the Emperor's light had never been known. Upon his death, the whole Imperium wept for the lost commander, but Macharius's conquered territories soon collapsed into rivalry and civil war. The Macarian heresy, as this time is now known, lasted for 70 standard years and was only ended through the combined efforts of 100 Space Marine chapters. In the 500th year of the 41st millennium, in an event known as the Tears of the Emperor, the Imperium was swept by visions of the Emperor's tears. From backwards feral planets to the most densely populated hive worlds, 1 million versions of the same story are told by holy men, street agitators, shamans, priests, and mystics. Primitives point to storm-filled skies, claiming that the drops falling from them are the tears of their mighty god. Upon ecclesiarchy cardinal worlds, archdeacons to lowly pilgrims claim to have seen statues of the divine emperor shed tears. Chapter masters and house city urchins alike have visions of the emperor stirring upon his throne, tears running from his empty sockets. Although the dreams take myriad forms, all know that the emperor weeps not for himself, but for the plight of mankind. This is the end of Part 2 of the timeline of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. I invite you to the third part.